Hello again. This is the continuation of the requirements elicitation and analysis. And before we continue on the validation, verification, approval of the requirements, we first define again the use of models to refine requirements. Okay? Balikan lang natin ang pinakamabilis. So business analysts use models to determine what is important and valuable so that the right requirements are created. So that's why we need to first discuss the different models, the different categories that the business analyst may use for the analysis of the requirements. So models are used during elicitation session to refine requirements with stakeholders or subject matter experts. So the business requirements document. So the business requirements are the goals, objectives, and higher level needs of the organization and provide the rationale for a new project. So hindi dapat natin i-skip yung documentations of the business requirements. So business requirements recognize what is critical to the business and why it is critical before defining a solution. So once we are done with the documentations of the business requirements, we have to define the solution documentation. By the way, the reasons for the documentations of the business requirements are mentioned to you last Google Meet po natin. So for the solution documentation is the documentation that is comprised of the features, functions, and characteristics of the product or service that will be built to meet the business and stakeholder requirements. So the work of the solution development team is heavily dependent on the solution documentation. That's why very important is the solution documentations in the process of the business planning. Because it serves as the blueprint, ito na yung blueprint, ito na yung magiging framework natin on how we should implement the solution. Okay? And the business stakeholders have a role to review, validate, and approve the solution documentation. That's why this will be the discussions natin for this video lecture. Yung requirements of the review, the validation, and the approval. So, paano yung gagawin and ano yung magiging process. Okay? So let's start with the solution documentation. So the solution documentation may be rendered in any number of forms. Some common forms include the following. So requirements document, which may be a business requirements document, and or a functional requirements specification, and or a system or software requirements specification, etc. It may also include a deck of user stories written or a set of use cases with accompanying non-functional requirements or list of items on the product backlog. Okay, so what are the requirements specifications? The requirements specification are the following. So we have the requirements specification is a common form for documenting requirements. It attempts to specify all circumstances, conditions, actions, reactions, results, and error conditions that could possibly occur in the defined solution. And the requirements specification is a generic term that includes all documents that contain requirements. Okay? But there are times that the documenting has an assumptions. So bakit ginagawa yung assumptions? An assumption is a factor that is considered to be true, real, or certain without proof or demonstration. Analysis starts with assumptions, and these assumptions are either proven or disproven or the course of a project. So paano yun? How we could document those assumptions? But actually, these assumptions may be valid for the following situations. Okay? So, kailan lang valid ang assumptions? So, there are many situations where assumptions are valid and warranted, such as kapag daw yung mga informations is unavailable. So, hindi siya kumpleto. So, we do assumptions. Okay? Or kaya naman, the success of the project is dependent upon something happening in the future. Or the assumptions are made based on factors that exist currently, but those factors may not exist in the future. So the common assumptions about a project, for example, is that all members of the team will stay on the project until the project is completed. What if hindi naman? So the longer the project, the less likely that this assumption is true. So we have the documenting constraint. So the project management view of a constraint is that it is a limiting factor, okay, that affects the execution of the project, the program, or the portfolio, or the process. In business analysis, a constraint is a limiting factor. Okay, kung ang requirement natin, nakasulat siya in a positive voice, ang constraint, syempre, ito yung naglilimit. So, more on the negative side siya. So, meron tayong two level of constraint. First is the solution constraint. So, in the solution constraint, ito ay typically written in a negative or constraining language and limit the solution by stating actions that cannot be performed. So we have the following examples for solution constraint: restricting access to sales information to the region that the customer is located in geography. Prohibition against using certain building materials. Security restrictions preventing the use of a certain data or systems by unauthorized personnel, or limitations on the amount of change that the organization can withstand over any period of time. So another constraint is the project constraint. So what are the examples of the project constraint? We have direction to use predetermined equipment, organizational standards, or a preferred supplier. Restrictions such as resource utilization, message size and timing, software size, maximum number of the size of files, records, and data elements, or the time, yung deadline, the cost, and the scope. So these are the constraints in documenting the solution. But once we are done with the documentations, we should validate the requirements. So what is the validation? Validation is defined as the assurance that a product, service, or system meets the needs of the customer and other identified stakeholders. Requirements validation is the process of ensuring all requirements accurately reflect the intent of the stakeholder, thereby ensuring the requirements meet their expectations. So confirmation is not the approval. Only authorized stakeholders can approve, but we have the concept of continual confirmation. Okay? Confirmation occurs whenever the business analyst reviews the information gathered during an elicitation session with the stakeholder, or any part of the developing solution is shown to the stakeholders. So confirmation, obtaining agreement from the stakeholders that the solution under development is good and will accomplish the objective. So this is a part of the validation requirements. So confirmation meaning you have to obtain the agreement from the stakeholders. Okay. We also have the requirements walkthrough. So this is one of the validation technique that a business analyst may use. Requirements walkthrough are used to review the requirements with the stakeholders and to review confirmation that the requirements are stated are valid. So valid requirements accurately reflect what the stakeholders are asking the solution developers to develop. So once we are done with the validation, we need to verify the requirements. So verification is performed by members of the solution team to ensure that the requirements meet quality standards or any other business analysis deliverables in the process meets the standards or excellence for the organization. So verification is the process of reviewing the requirements for errors and quality. Verification may occur before of or after validation. So we have two types of verification process. First is the peer review. So peer review, the purpose of peer review is to ensure that the written business analysis deliverables, including all forms of requirement documentation, are in compliance with the organizational standards and generally held principles of requirements writing. So basically, all the documents on the solution documentations will be passed through a peer kung saan siya naman yung mag-check kung tama ba lahat ng documents. Okay? So we also have the inspections. So inspections are a more rigorous form of peer review. Inspections were initially targeted for hardware development and were later modified to be applicable for anything that needs to be reviewed for accuracy, completeness, and relevance, etc. Okay, so basically, all the documents, binibigay natin into assigned inspector. So may nag-assign ng top management or the stakeholders who will review, who will verify the requirements, both for the peer review and the inspection. So after all the documents are passed through with the validation and verification, it needs to be approved. So approval sessions are conducted separately from confirmation sessions. Okay. So after the solution is confirmed and validated, the business analyst obtains a sign-off on the requirements. So sign-off may be formal or not, and may be predetermined in business analysis planning. Since the requirements are confirmed to be correct, accurate, understandable, and implementable, etc., by all of the individual constituencies, obtaining approval from a senior manager should be a routine process. Okay. So problems in obtaining approval arise when the lower level managers or process workers have not seen the requirements yet and are unable to provide a positive opinion about them to the senior manager. So there are actually some conflicts that may arise even though for approval na yung ating documents. So how do we resolve requirements-related conflicts? So conflicts may arise at any point in the business analysis process. Whether the conflict is between business units voicing opposing views or what the solution should be, or a solution team and the product stakeholders disagreeing on the way to solve the business problems, the first order of business is to determine what the problem is and that the parties are attempting to solve. And that is a part of the business analyst. Siya yung magbi-mediate kung ano man situation, kung ano man yung conflict na yan, syempre siya dapat yung mag-mediate in the situation. By discussing, syempre, the differences and by understanding the points of view of each stakeholders. So we have different techniques to solve these conflicts. First is the Delphi. The Delphi technique is an information gathering technique used as a way to reach consensus from experts on a subject. So the Delphi method relies on peer pressure and the wisdom of crowds to produce the correct decisions or solution. So we also have multi-voting. So multi-voting technique. When applying the multi-voting technique to resolve a conflict, the team brainstorms to generate a possible list of options for resolving the conflict. So the team decides how many items will be on the final list. So ito yung multi-voting. This is the most common na ginagawa sa lahat ng units and offices. We tried to count the votes kung saan yung pinakamarami, then that is the i-apply. Okay? We also have weighted ranking. So the weighted ranking technique is applied in a manner of first, options are listed, ranked, and voted upon. So the option with the highest score is selected. Options are typically solution related. So basically, weighted ranking is almost the same with multi-voting technique. So I think that ends my presentation for the end. This is also the end of the lesson 5 for lesson 6, the requirements, elicitation, and analysis. Any questions or inquiries, please message me on the Google Classroom or in our group chats. Thank you for listening and watching. Bye, everyone.